So good morning, members. Welcome to our IWC March General Meeting via Zoom. I'm so happy to see everybody here, even if it's in Zoom rather than on person. But we have good news regarding in-person meetings, a little bit more on that later. If you've read the newsletter this month, you know that I ask everyone to continue checking it out. It's been reformatted into more of a magazine style. We have club news. We remind members of all our amazing activities. And thanks to your group activity leaders, we also have a lot of interesting options this upcoming month. Okay, so what do we have in our newsletter? We have articles, so you can get to know members of our club better in the Have You Met ... yet section. We have a humor and inspiration section. I don't know if anyone closely read the little blurb in the humor section that said food that increases serotonin, the happy hormone blurb. Check it out, you might get a little laugh out of it. We also have recipes in it. Many are submitted by members. This month we have a recipe for a simple pasta, which has come to South Africa via an Italian who is living in Sweden. So I think if that's any definition of the IWC, that's it. And also articles regarding what's relevant to what's going around us in our world today. So basically our aim is to make this newsletter something that you look forward to every month. We want you to read it and be connected to our club. This month, our newsletter has been focused on mental health and positivity during these unusual and sometimes lonely times. As a club, we'd like to give our condolences for those who've been affected by COVID, family, friends, those who've experienced loss, and just let you know that we sympathize with those who have experienced pain due to this pandemic. We know there is with you.
Balance.
Yeah.
Good balance.
Am I still, someone keeps on unmuting themselves. If you guys can just please keep yourself muted, you'll still be able to hear us. It just means that we don't hear you. Anyways, yeah, so you know, for some of you, this period has been particularly difficult, and we do care for your emotional well-being. Our thoughts are with you, and we ask that you please reach out to us when you're feeling in need. Our club is designed so that we can be here for each other. Don't be afraid, pick up the phone and give each other a call. Give me a call, I'm here, you can find me in the directory. Speaking about directories, please check your details in the directory to make sure they are correct, especially your number for WhatsApp. Victoria will discuss this a little more shortly. Our directory is how we keep in touch with each other and also how we keep currently paid up members up to date with club happenings. Speaking of which, have you guys paid your subs yet? We've done pretty well this year, but we still have a few subs outstanding. We do need them by the end of this month to confirm you as a member of our club. These dues are important because they help keep this club that we care so much for functioning. Briefly, I'd like to tell you a little bit about some of the new initiatives we're taking on as a club this year. In celebration of International Women's Day this month, which is the 8th of March, I've been very busy reaching out to other international women's clubs around the world to see if we can share some of our programming with them and they with us. Having the benefit of virtual meetings via Zoom means that it's a lot easier to reach out to other clubs now. And what I've discovered is that other clubs are excited to partner with us too. This month, we are collaborating with clubs in Sweden, thanks to an introduction from Elizabeth Handley, who also belongs to the Stockholm IWC. We started with Stockholm, Sweden, and then very quickly, our network grew to Malmö and Gothenburg, which are also, Gothenburg, which are also cities in Sweden. They will be participating in our music appreciation group, which is run by Elizabeth Handley. And thanks to Margaret Abbott, also our Flora of the Southwestern Cape Garden talk, which she will be giving later this month on the 16th of March. I encourage you all to tune in. Some of the IWC Stockholm board, including the president and the vice president, also joined in Liliana's Great Journeys talk, which they enjoyed. Swedish clubs will be also sharing a cooking class with us later this month. And if you look in the newsletter, you'll see there is a seminar on Swedish berries. Details of this can be found in the newsletter, as I mentioned, and further and more up-to-date information will be on Facebook. So please make sure you've joined our IWC Cape Town Facebook page for more updates. In terms of further collaborations, we're also going to be collaborating with Vilnius in Latvia, Dublin in Ireland, and Lugano in Switzerland, with more possibilities, including London and Chicago. We're looking forward to sharing cooking classes, dance classes, exercise classes, and talks about culture, history, and art. We'll be able to meet other women in other clubs and expand our worldwide networks. In some ways, it's an updated form of pen pals. If you, as a member, belong to another IWC club around the world, please do let us know, because we're very happy to find collaborations amongst our members as well. That's the easiest way for it to happen. Lastly, the news we have all been waiting for. Because of the change in government regulations, it's now clear we will be able to have an in-person meeting at Kelvin Grove in April. Yay! We're excited to announce that Alan Committee, the comedian, will be our guest speaker. And I remember a lot of our members enjoyed him last year. We had him in February before all this lockdown started. We definitely feel that a bit of humor is needed this year. However, Kelvin Grove has informed us that numbers are still limited, so we will likely only be able to have 100 people attending in person. As this will be a first in-person meeting in over a year, I think that a lot of you would like to attend, that you'll be keen to attend. We would like, however, for area representatives, group leaders, and new members to have first priority to attend, because we want to thank them for all the hard work they've put in during lockdown, and also so that new members can be introduced to our club in a formal way. For the additional seats, we will be implementing a raffle system. So if you'll please send a message to the official IWC WhatsApp number to request a seat for the April meeting, Victoria, our social media chair, will also send out a reminder WhatsApp so that everyone who wishes to can apply. We will then take all the names that have applied to attend and put them in a hat, and we will draw them. But we will do this draw via Facebook Live, via our International Women's Club page, so that everyone can be assured of a fair process, and so that you can also tune into our Facebook page. We'll do the same meeting again for May, and for as long as we are allowed to have in-person meetings. But we will ensure that those who were not able to make the April meeting can have first priority for the May meeting, because we want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to attend in person to our meetings. We will continue to have email signups for small group activities, so that even if you cannot come to Kelvin Grove, you'll still be able to participate in your chosen areas of interest. Lastly, if you feel that you would like to attend the meeting and you have extenuating circumstances, please write to us as a board and let us know why you'd like to attend and your reasons for doing so. Let's see. Well, also the new regulations also have repercussions for the small group activities. So I'm going to turn it over to Christine, our Vice President, so she can tell you about the changes. Thank you again for joining our Zoom monthly meeting, and thank you for being an important member of our club.
Good morning, ladies. Great to have so many of you joining us online. Hello, fellow Zoomies. I just want to reiterate what Amanda said about the newsletter. It really is an excellent communication tool, and she doesn't mention how much hard work she herself puts into it and putting it together. So please have a look on the website. Look, I'm old-fashioned. I actually print one to keep it on file, but it's colorful, it's full of news, it's full of entertaining reading, it is inspiring, and it's a bumper edition yet again. So this is the important tool to have a look at to find out what's going to be happening in the coming month. And thank you also, Amanda, for reaching out to the other branches of our international club. That's exciting news. We really are becoming truly international. But the exciting news, yes, now that the president has kindly moved us to lockdown level 1, we can relax slightly the rules on numbers attending group activities. Obviously still observing all the COVID protocols, but the newsletter shows some of the fun events that are happening this coming month. There's going to be the Friday lunch club, the Sunday lunch club, the wine appreciation, Zumba is still going on, and there's so many nice activities now. So do have a look and sign up for something if you'd like to go along. Sign up by email. And if if you are not able to go along, you know, you can still join some activities online, or read about them on our Facebook page. But we'd really love to see you in person if you're able to attend a coffee morning or the wine tasting or whatever grabs your interest. So take a look. The numbers can slightly increase, but obviously not too large. And the group leaders normally have some limitation on how many they can accommodate. So make sure you book that space. As always, I'd like to say a big thank you to the group leaders who've done a lot of work putting together safe and appropriate outings, and also the area reps who have been holding online coffee mornings, and now they are also meeting in person. So if you haven't met with your friends, now's the chance to venture out maybe and enjoy a coffee with your own area. There's a lovely page of photographs of some of the get-togethers in the newsletter, which will show you people meeting face to face at long last. So let's join in and try and you know, enjoy a face to face gathering. The meeting next month, as Amanda said, is very exciting. We can actually finally meet in person. So, but with limited numbers. So that we'll have to deal with our draw. But I hope to get to meet more of you in the next month and in March and April. I've signed myself up for the Friday Lunch Club and the Sunday Lunch Club. Perhaps I ought to sign up for the hiking and walking, because I seem to do an awful lot of eating and drinking. So I'll try and sign up for something a little bit more taxing. But yeah, it's exciting that life is a little bit more normal and a little bit more social. So please have a look at the newsletter, have a look at what the group leaders are doing, and sign up for something. Okay, that's it from me.
Okay. Okay, I've had a few people in the chat just asking how we sign up for the April meeting, and that's via the WhatsApp, the IWC WhatsApp broadcast message. I'm sorry, I'm Victoria, social media chair. I've put in the chat room the number, but please take it down. It's 079 044 0821. That's 079 044 082. And this brings me to a point I want to raise. If your WhatsApp is on an international phone, so say you have one for your family in the UK or Ireland or wherever, and that is registered to your UK number, then we need to have that number to contact you. If you're a swallow, so you run two phones, please, you know, the WhatsApp number you use the most, that's the one we need. Even if you have a local number for people wanting to call you here, that's fine, but give us the WhatsApp number as well. I think in the directory, instead of a fax number now, we're going to have a WhatsApp number, because when was the last time anybody used a fax? So just in case there's a difference, then that gives the option that we can use that, because that seems to be an issue with some members who haven't received things over the last year. So that's, and please, again, I know Amanda just mentioned it, but please check your details in the directory. A lot of people's emails have changed over time. If you've moved house, or just check that the number is correct for you. I have had a situation where two people who were next to each other in the list, it was the right name but wrong number, and it was just they'd taken the next person on the list, whoever had put it in. So please make sure that that's all correct. I've also posted, and I'll repost at the end, because I see there's a lot of chat going on, but I'll repost at the end, and I will repost on the Facebook page the IWC broadcast number, and the details for the Facebook group I will send out via WhatsApp. But if you're not on WhatsApp and you're not on Facebook, I can't contact you. So please, in the newsletter as well, that was my last hope. In the newsletter, I've put all three methods of communication in there. But if you can't complain, we don't contact you if you don't give us the means to do so. Okay, well, have a lovely month, and let's hope we see you in April.
Fabulous. Okay, so without further ado, although just before I introduce the speaker, I would like to make it clear that our April meeting will be a hybrid meeting. So even if you cannot attend in person or you don't get the raffle, you will still be able to watch it via Zoom. We are going ahead with hybrid meetings in the future. That way, so if you don't feel comfortable coming to a meeting just yet, we certainly respect that. And we'd love to see you virtually as well as in person. Last thing, I've just gotten a message from someone saying they thought the WhatsApp number did not receive messages. In this instance, we will be able to receive messages from you. So we will send out, Victoria will send out a WhatsApp and we will receive a reply from you if you say you would like to join. Okay, so without further ado, for the second time, I would like to introduce our speaker who has so generously offered to be here for us today. Her name is Dr. Anastasia Thompson. She's a medical doctor, author, and an activist in the field of LGBTQIA rights. She's a queer identified woman herself, and Anastasia uses her lived experiences and professional training to inform her work in educating and spreading awareness around SOGIE minorities. And she's probably going to tell you a little bit more about what these acronyms mean. She's going to be speaking about some of the misconceptions and misunderstandings surrounding sexuality, gender identity, and what it means to be part of the LGBTQIA+ community in today's world. Drawing on her experience as a doctor and a member of this community, she will share both scientific information and personal experience to help bring home a better understanding of what people in these marginalized groups experience on a daily basis. Among her accolades, she has been recognized as a Mandela Washington Fellow, as one of Mail and Guardian's 200 Young South Africans, and as one of the Young Independents Mzansi 100. She has also been published in the peer-reviewed open access South African Journal of Bioethics and Law on the subject of medical ethics and gender-affirming care. Her activism work sees her engaging with general public, with parent or ally groups, with cultural communities, with NGOs, and with governmental agencies, and of course with LGBTQIA populations directly. She advocates for improving access to competent care for queer identified people in South Africa, which is really important. She regularly works with such varied groups as the University of Pretoria Center for Human Rights, the UNDP, the South African Judicial Education Institute, as well as regularly lecturing undergraduate medical students at UCT on issues of gender and SOGIE minorities. Working together with compounding pharmacists, Anastasia was instrumental in driving the process for making injectable estradiol valerate, which is the international gold standard for feminizing gender-affirming hormone therapy for trans patients, available in South Africa. Her globally available 2016 memoir, Always Anastasia, offers a candid, intimate window into her experiences with the hope of cultivating understanding, compassion, and empathy towards diverse identities. So thank you, Anastasia, for being with us here today, and I will be making you spotlighted.
Hi there, and thanks for the invitation and for the introduction. Sounds like I have some pretty big shoes to fill. It's also no wonder that I'm so absolutely permanently exhausted hearing you read all of that out. It seems like I do a lot of things. So, as you know by now, my name is Anastasia. My pronouns are she and her, and I do a bunch of different things that I can't even keep track of. By day, I am a doctor providing primary care both to the queer community and just to patients in the lovely remote fishing village that I inhabit. You might have heard of it, it's called Sea Point. And then I do a lot of education and outreach. And, you know, I feel like this is something that's especially important. And, you know, the reason for that is there are, and we'll discuss a lot of the axes along which people face prejudice and discrimination and marginalization in society. But I think that a lot of it, especially when we talk about the queer community, is driven more by ignorance than it is by malice. And certainly this is because I choose to believe in humanity's better angels. And I think that there are very few amongst us who actively choose to go out in our day-to-day lives and inflict harm on people. Maybe it's a misguided principle, but I think a lot of the prejudice that people in my community face is really driven by ignorance and a lack of understanding. And it's this ignorance and this cognitive dissonance that I really want to try to address with you today, because I think that understanding, knowledge, education really empowers people to tap into this intrinsic human quality of compassion and empathy. And I think that's really the outcome and the goal. Having said all of that, I do want, in as much as possible, to allow our audience to be involved in the direction of this presentation. Everything that I speak about, I already know, so I can rehash it ad nauseum. But I do hope that you'll get something valuable out of this. So we will allocate a little bit of time towards the end of the session for questions and answers, but I'll also welcome you if there is something that you don't understand. You are free to raise a hand or to put it in the chat box. We'll try and address it as I go along. I might ask for a little bit of participation here and there, and I would welcome your willingness to involve yourself in that. Of course, I do want you to have agency in this space, so I'm not going to pick on anyone. And you don't have to speak up if you don't want to, but it is the dynamism and the interaction that allows these sessions to really be as valuable as possible. I certainly will be sharing a screen at some point. I like to use a whiteboard and pretend that I'm a primary school teacher, so bear with me. I do have doctor's handwriting. I will do my best to keep it legible. Please tell me if you can't see what I'm trying to put down, or if it's not legible enough for you, or if I'm going too fast or anything like that. And then finally, before I actually launch into what I want to talk about, and at the moment I'm just stalling for time because I haven't prepared. I don't prepare for presentations. Firstly, I don't have the time, and secondly, I don't have the attention span. So I tend to do these things very much off the cuff. So the last aspect to the preamble, and hopefully by the time I finish this, I'll have arranged my thoughts into a pattern coherent enough to address you in a useful fashion this morning. But the last thing is just to say that I do want this to be, as much as possible, a safe space. And it's a lofty ambition, bear with me, it's a lofty ambition, but let's try as much as we can to leave our judgments and our assumptions about people very much at the door. And this actually serves as quite a useful springboard and a platform for us to move into what I want to talk about. So let me see if I can bring up a whiteboard here, and I hope that you'll be able to see this quite nicely. It's always a challenge to find the correct weight of line to draw with and the correct color. So let's see if we can come right here today. So one of the concepts that I want to introduce you to, and I said it's important to leave judgments and assumptions at the door. Having said that, I also think it's important for us to acknowledge that part of human nature is very much when we meet or interact with someone for the first time in our lives to try to sum them up, or to get an idea of who this person is that we've met or that we're now interacting with. And this is a process that takes place literally in the blink of an eye, and it's often a subconscious process. It's not something that we actively think about, but we look at someone, and based on the information that we can derive from looking at them or listening to them, we try to formulate a picture of who this person is. And some of the factors or the characteristics that we might look at in this process, and of course you'll understand these are just a few examples. It doesn't encapsulate everything that happens in that split second, but we'll look at a person's skin color, for example. We'll try to get a read on a person's gender. Is this someone who's a man, or is this someone who's a woman, or am I having difficulty placing this person's expression of gender? And I will talk about expression of gender a little bit later on as we progress. We'll look at a person's age, and we'll try and make an inference about how old they are. We might look at the kind of clothes that they're wearing and try to draw some conclusions about this person's class or socioeconomic background, or perhaps the kind of work that they do. We'll look at a person's mannerisms. We'll look at the way that a person speaks, whether they speak with an accent, or whether we assume that English is their first language, for example. So these are all kinds of observations that we make about people. And as I've said already to you, this is very much human nature. There's nothing wrong with it. We all do it. The problem is that it doesn't stop at making observations, because we take those observations one step further, and from those observations that we've made, we really try, or no, I shouldn't say try, but we are conditioned to make value judgments about people. So when you look at someone and you try to discern if this person is in fact a man or a woman, the next thing that happens is that the weight and the value that we assign to men and women in society becomes relevant in this space. When we look at someone's age, we make value judgments about their worth in society based on their age. And the way that I like to conceptualize this, and it really is just a thought experiment, but we can imagine that every human being in the world might start off with, on this imaginary Anastasia Thompson societal worth scale, everyone might start off with 100 points. And then we make all of these observations about them. And please, again, stop me if you're not able to see what I'm doing here. So we might look at someone and ask ourselves the question, is this a man? And if it's not a man, we'll subtract 10 points from them immediately, because we know that men are worth more in society. And this isn't to say that this is any of our viewpoints, especially, but this is to say that it's a societal construct and a societal norm that we've all been conditioned with. You know, as women moving through this world, we know that we don't earn as much as men in professions. We know that we are often subject to violence that men might not be subject to. We know that the voice of a woman is often not worth as much as that of a man. We'll look at the skin color and we'll say, well, if you're not white, we're going to subtract 10 points, because we know that there's institutionalized and systemic racism in the world, and we know that white voices are valued above black voices, white bodies are valued above bodies of color. We might look at someone's age, and depending on where you fit in that cutoff, if you're too old or if you're too young, if you're not contributing economically to society, you might lose 10 points. If English is not your first language, you might lose 10 points. If you're dressed in clothes that are worn and tattered, and we assume that you don't have financial means, you might lose 10 points. If we look at you and we perceive that you are not straight, for example, if we see two women walking down the street holding hands, who are obviously in a loving partnership, we might lose 10 points. And at the end of this, and like I've said, this isn't all encompassing, but it illustrates a concept. At the end of this, we come up with a figure, and this figure really is something that we infer a person's worth in society from whatever we tally up for them. Sorry, I see that there are some difficulties. People aren't able to see me at the same time as I draw on the whiteboard.
No, we're fine.
But,
I've sorted it out, Anastasia. It's okay.
all right, fantastic. So at the end of this, we end up with a tally, and we compare that tally to this 100-point standard. And there's a word that I like to use here, and I say to people that this is, for me as an activist doing the work that I do, my swear word is the word normal. 100 points is the ideal in society. This is the straight cisgender, and if you don't know what cisgender means, I will tell you in a few minutes. The straight cisgender white upper middle class man who's between the ages of, for argument's sake, 29 and 55. this is the ideal, this is the norm, this is society's idea of what a person should look like. And the further that you stray down this rating scale from the 100 points, and remember, there's all kinds of other axes here that we talk about, physical disability, neurodiversity, all kinds of things. The further you find yourself from this ideal, this norm of 100 points, the less you are worth in society. And this becomes relevant when we look at the way that society treats people who are seen as different, who are seen as lesser than others. And I spoke a little bit about this earlier on. You know, we spoke about the wage gap that women face in the world. If you don't have 100 points, we're entitled to pay you less, even if you do the same work or you do harder work or more work, you put in more hours, we're entitled to pay you less for that. If you walk down the street as a woman, we're entitled to catcall you or to make comments that are abusive towards you, or the mayor of New York is entitled to proposition you at a friend's wedding. These are the sort of things that happen to people because they are seen as lesser in the eyes of society. And as I've said to you, for very few of us, this is a process that is conscious and cognitive. For a lot of us, the prejudice that we talk about, or this idea of people's worth, is conditioned into us. We get this information not because anyone sits us down and says to us in as many words, you know, women are less important than men. But we see the way that society treats women. We see the way that we speak about them. The same goes for queer people or people in the LGBTQIA+ community. We know from the way that they are depicted in television, in movies, in books, in newspaper articles. We know from the way that our communities and perhaps our friends or our parents talk about queer people. We know from the hate crimes that we see going on in society, and I will talk about that a little bit later on in more detail. We know that the LGBTQIA community is valued less than the straight community, and this is quite important. So I'm going to depart from this for a minute because I've been using this acronym LGBTQIA+, and I just want to touch base with our audience and make sure that everyone actually knows what I'm referring to when I say this. So I'm going to draw it out. And this is a moment where I will ask for some participation or perhaps a volunteer or two from our audience. And perhaps you'll just help me to unpack what the various letters in this acronym that we use so prolifically, what they stand for. So let me ask you, the L in LGBTQIA+, do we know what that is? And you can unmute yourself and speak up. You can put it in the chat box if you want.
Lesbian.
Lesbian. Fantastic. All right, so I'll accept that. Let's move on to the G. What is the G?
You can unmute yourself, guys, so we can hear it.
All right, I heard someone say gay, and I'll take that. What about the B?
Bisexual?
Bisexual. Fantastic. Not going to write out the whole word. What about T?
Trans.
Transgender.
All right, so I heard trans and I heard transgender, and those are both acceptable to me. There is another word that we used to use, which we don't use anymore, and that word is transsexual. And this is a word that you'll start to hear a lot of in the medical literature in the 1970s and onwards. And the word has fallen out of favor. And this is quite an important concept that I'm still going to talk about a little bit on the importance of language. We don't use the word transsexual anymore because it has these highly medicalized and highly pathologized associations and baggage that comes along with it. There are still people in this world who will identify themselves as transsexual. And I respect that. I respect any person's right to claim a label for themselves. But I certainly will not use this word to refer to anyone who doesn't apply it to themselves. And I certainly will not take kindly to anyone using this word to refer to me because it does carry all of that baggage. And we'll unpack some of that as we go along. the important point here is to realize that the language that we use changes, and I will unpack that a little bit more for you. But let's carry on. What about the Q? Do we know what the Q stands for?
Queer.
Queer.
All right, I like that, queer. And the other one that you'll hear people use for Q is also questioning, because sometimes it can be a process to understand your identity and your sexuality, and we'll discuss that in a little bit more detail. So the word queer is quite an interesting one, because I'm sure many people in this audience will recognize that the word queer has for some time in the past been used as a pejorative, as a tool to target and to disempower and to be used as a weapon against people in the LGBTQIA community. Nowadays, queer is a word that we as members of this community have reclaimed. And the difference here is in the power dynamic around the language. And I do hope that this makes sense. So stop me if it doesn't. Words carry weight, and words carry meaning and power. And for the longest time, and this comes back to what I said about the word transsexual, the words that we use to refer to people in the LGBTQIA+ community, these words were defined by people outside of the community, and they were applied to people inside the community without their agency and without their consent. And as I'm sure you can appreciate, when something is done to you without consent, whether this is an act that is physical in nature, or whether it's a word that's being applied to you, language that's being used against you, without your consent, it is an act of violence. When you are catcalled on the street, that is something that we refer to as a microaggression. It's an act of violence against you. So the concept of the power dynamic and who is defining the words becomes important, and this is what's happened with the queer community. As we've said, we will redefine for ourselves what the word queer means, and we will choose to use it as a label for ourselves if it feels correct to us. So I use the label queer. This is one of the flags under which I identify, because to me the word queer means that we do not accept the status quo. We do not stand for all of these harmful dynamics that operate in society. We try and challenge those structures of oppression and marginalization. If you ask another queer person what the word means to them, their definition might very well be different to mine. It doesn't mean that either of us is necessarily correct or incorrect. It means that we have reclaimed the word for ourselves, and we are defining it for ourselves. And it's really when the agency is in the hands of the people in the community, when they take the labels for themselves, that these labels become de-weaponized. So you can't use the word queer against me if I decide what the word means. If someone else, as a straight person outside of the community, says that queer is a pejorative and a dirty word, and people who are queer are somehow broken or somehow threatening to the rest of us, then that word is a weapon. When I stand up and I say, queer is part of who I am and I will define for you what it means, then we take that power and that agency back. Let's move back to our acronym, and let's just visit I for a moment. And I'll again ask for your help.
I'm guessing intersex.
I think so.
Intersex, that's absolutely right. Intersex, that's quite correct. And we'll unpack a little bit between sex and gender and what intersex is. I'll do that for you in a minute. And then we have the A. What about the A? Do you know what it stands for?
Asexual?
Asexual?
Asexual, fantastic. A does not stand for ally, and if you don't understand why, you will in a minute. The last thing that I want to talk about here briefly is just the plus, and the plus really pays cognizance to the fact that what I'm doing here is I'm using a tool that is inherently limited. I'm using language, and we have various languages. I'm sure many of our members speak more than one language. Language is a tool that we as human beings create, And what we're doing with it here is we are trying to use this limited tool of language to encapsulate human identity and experience. And as you can imagine, living on a planet with in excess of 7 billion people on it, no two life experiences look the same. No two expressions of identity in this world look the same. It seems obvious when you lay it out like this that language is never going to be capable of adequately communicating the entire breadth and the entire expanse of human identity. And when it comes to the LGBTQIA+ community, this is no different. Concepts of sexual orientation or of gender identity do not conform to the language. It's not because we have a word bisexual that we encounter people in this world who are attracted both to their own gender and to other genders. That's the definition that we use at the moment for bisexual. It's not because we have the word, it's because we have people who experience attraction like this that we developed a word to communicate it, and that word is bisexual. The language needs to catch up to, and this is a constant process, one that will never end, the language needs to catch up to human experience, and we are constantly in the process of redefining words like queer and adding new words. And that's why I put a plus here at the end. It's to say I recognize that the language follows the experience. The language does not drive the experience. My experience is valid. There may be words that fit it to some or other degree, and there may be words that don't. But the language, the job of language is to try and communicate as best we can human experience while realizing that we'll never fully be able to do so, but it also means that that language will grow and evolve and change throughout. Now, if we come back to this umbrella or this term, this acronym, LGBTQIA+, I have lesbian, I have gay, I have bisexual, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, these are all expressions of sexual orientation or sexual identity. If I use the word bisexual, it doesn't tell me very much about the person themselves. It tells me about the kind of people to whom they experience attraction. It doesn't tell me if this person is a man or a woman, or if that binary system does not apply to them. So I have sexual orientations. Then I have trans. Does anyone know what how would you define trans or transgender if I asked you to? If you're comfortable to volunteer, perhaps share your thoughts with us, I'd welcome that.
My understanding is that you identify as a different gender to that to which you were born.
All right, so that's a very good starting point for this. So let me draw on my own professional experience now as a medical doctor who's delivered a fair number of babies in her lifetime. When a child is born, and you might recognize this from the delivery room, the first thing that we do after extricating this child from the uterus is we look in between the legs at what we see, the external genitalia, and we decide, is this a boy or is this a girl? Congratulations, it's a something. Now, that process is what we call an assignment that is made at birth. So the next term that I'm going to share with you here is assigned at birth. So we look at the external genitalia, and I'll still explain to you this morning why that's scientifically flawed in terms of trying to determine someone's sex. But we say assigned at birth. You are assigned male at birth or assigned female at birth. Now, if you do not identify completely 100% with what you were assigned at birth, be it male or female, then by definition you're trans. So this is a matter of gender identity, and I'll explain that a little bit more later. Let's come back to the acronym. So I have sexual orientation. I have gender identity. I have this word queer, which is sometimes a political term or a philosophical term. It can mean a variety of different things. I have intersex, which is something that's related to anatomy or physiology or this concept of biological sex, which I'll still talk about with you. I have asexual, which refers not to the kind of people to whom you experience attraction, but a difference in the way that attraction is experienced. People who don't necessarily experience sexual attraction in the same way that the majority of people do. And then I have a plus. Now, this is a whole collection and assortment of very different things. Sexual orientation, gender identity, matters of biological sex, philosophical or political perspectives, but I put them under one single umbrella. What is the common thread between all of these different labels or flags that ties them together? It's not who they are, it's who they are not. And when I use this label LGBTQIA+, what I'm referring to is a group of people who are not simultaneously at the same time cisgender. This is the opposite of transgender. I'll go into that in a second. Heterosexual or straight. And then another word that I might be teaching you for the first time, allosexual. This refers to people who experience sexual attraction in ways that are common. So this is the opposite of asexual. If you are not all three of these things at the same time, you are part of the LGBTQIA+ community. It means that by definition on the score sheet that I introduced you to, you have already lost points for sexual orientation, for gender identity, for gender expression, for the way that you experience sexual attraction, etc. You are part of a group that is linked not necessarily by who you are, but by who you are not. Because you are not all of these three things at the same time, you are seen in the eyes of society as not being part of the group that is regarded as normal. And remember, I spoke to you about value judgments. If you're not normal, by definition, you must be abnormal. This is the inference. It's not a huge leap of logic. Now I'll ask you, how does that word sound? How does that word feel? What sort of feelings does the word abnormal evoke in you? Is this a good word?
No.
Hurtful. Wow.
This word is a judgment. This word is an indictment. This is a loaded word. Abnormal, deviant, broken, defective. There is something wrong with you if you are part of this group. And we as society are allowed, we can get away with perpetrating violence against you because of that. And that's where LGBTQIA+ comes from, and this is the group of people that we are talking about. Now, I said to you a minute ago that I have a word here, cisgender. Now, for me, as an activist who does a lot of work for transgender rights, this is one of the most important words in my vocabulary. And the reason for this is that if I don't have the word cisgender, and those of you who are well-versed in Latin will recognize the difference in prefix here, cis and trans. Cis meaning on the same side, you identify with the sex that you are assigned at birth. Trans meaning you do not, you're across from it, you do not identify with the sex that you are assigned at birth. If I don't have the word cisgender, then the opposite of trans becomes that word that we keep using, normal. And that means that trans by definition is now abnormal. And the same goes when we speak about words like heterosexual. It's not a slur. To call someone cisgender or to call someone heterosexual is not a slur. It can never be, because people in this community are at the higher end of that power dynamic, that score sheet. You're closer to the 100 points if you are cisgender, heterosexual, allosexual. So you are on the powerful end of this dynamic. And the words that we use for people are not there in order to target them. We in the queer community don't have the power to do that. As a minority group, we don't have the power to do that. But we use the language in order to remove the stigma and in order to say both cisgender and transgender are a-okay. There's nothing wrong with them. No one is abnormal. All right, so I hope that made sense. The next thing that I said that I promised I'd talk to you about was the concept of biological sex. So before we delve into that, I'll ask for your help once again, because we have these two words that we throw around that we use almost interchangeably, sex and gender. I know sometimes when I go fill out a form for whatever reason, the form might ask for sex, the form might ask for gender. They're used interchangeably. Do we think that they mean the same thing? Or is there a difference?
Feel free to contribute, guys.
Sorry, Amanda, I didn't get that.
I was just saying to the members, they're welcome to please contribute by just unmuting themselves if they'd like to say something.
It's something that does confuse me as to what your in what language you're supposed to be using, particularly with trans, and that's why I'm really looking forward to listening to you, because it is confusing.
All right, that's the best answer that I could have hoped for, because it means that what I'm talking about is certainly relevant, and I hope that you will gain from it.
I would say
So
that
Jen,
gender is a word that doesn't necessarily have to be connected with sex.
okay, so Christine, you'll argue that the two are different.
Yes. Yes.
Do you know what the difference is?
Because sex, in a sense, obviously just the word sexualizes it, whereas gender.
Okay, so certainly there is a lot of baggage around that, and that's one of the reasons that I said to you I don't like the word transsexual. Often when I ask this question, I get the answer that gender is a social construct and that sex is related to biology. You'll also remember that I said to you that when a baby is delivered, we look at that baby's external genitalia and we say, what do we see here? Do we see a penis and a scrotum, or do we see a vulva? And that's a biological or a physical, oh, that's not a good E. That's a biological or a physical characteristic that we look at to determine someone's sex. But again, I will tell you as a doctor that there are other characteristics that come into this. External genitalia is not the be-all and end-all of biological sex. What else do you think might play a role here? What about hormones, estrogen and testosterone? What about internal Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I thought you were waiting for us. We're always told men have more testosterone, and estrogen and progesterone is female. So
Correct. Male versus female hormones. What about internal reproductive anatomy? So we're told that people who are female have a uterus and ovaries, and we're told that people who are male have a prostate. So internal reproductive anatomy. The next one I already gave to you when I said ovaries, and that's gonadal tissue. So that's ovaries or testes. And I left one out, and you will know this one. And that's chromosomes, XX and XY. Does that ring a bell? All right, so let me see if it is possible for me to get a panel open where I can see many cameras at once. Yes, fantastic. If you'll indulge me, I would like for us to play a little game very quickly. You don't have to unmute, but if you are on camera, all I'm going to ask you to do is to put up your hand if you know the answer to the question that I ask you. You don't have to answer it. You just have to put up your hand to tell me that you know. So, our first characteristic, external genitalia. For those of you in attendance, if you know what your external genitalia look like and whether they would fit into the category of male or female, you can put up your hand for me. And if you don't know and you need to take a minute and go to the bathroom with a mirror, I will allow that. We will wait for you to come back. All right, fantastic. We have 100% success rate on that. And that's very good. It's important to know these things about yourself. If anyone has had their hormone levels tested, estrogen or testosterone, perhaps you went and did a workup at the doctor for fatigue or whatever else, do you know your hormone levels? Have you ever had them tested? All right, a fair number of us have had our hormone levels tested, let's say conservatively, maybe it's 60% of us. If you know for certain that you have a uterus or that you have a prostate, maybe you've had a digital exam, maybe you've had an ultrasound, maybe you've had a laparoscopy, you can put up your hand if you know with certainty about your internal reproductive anatomy. All right, fantastic. Quite a few of us there, so we'll put that at maybe a nice 75%. Who in the room has ever had their chromosomes tested? Do you know if you are XX or XY? I don't see many or any hands. How many of you have had a tissue sample taken from your gonads by needle biopsy, sent to the laboratory, fixed on a slide, stained, looked at under a microscope, reported on by the pathologist to tell you whether that tissue was in fact 100% ovarian or testicular in origin? A couple of people, and I'm sure that those procedures were done for reasons other than determining your biological sex. But perhaps you have, not many of us have. So, out of this list of 5 characteristics that I've given you, 100% of us are certain on one of those characteristics. Perhaps 62.5% or 65% of us have certainty on up to 3 of those characteristics. A very small fraction of us will know for certainty 4 of these characteristics, and almost none, if not none of us at all in this room will know all 5 of these characteristics about their own bodies. But we look at children, at infants, and we make an assumption based on one of these characteristics as to whether that child is biologically male or female. The next question, and you can just nod along or shake your head, do you think that all 5 of these characteristics will necessarily line up, that if you have one of them in the F column, that you will have all the rest of them in the F column? I see people shaking their heads. No. We've spoken already about the fact that there are intersex people in the world. And we know that there are a variety of reasons or factors that might lead people to have one or more of these characteristics out of line with the others, that we can't neatly tick all of the boxes as M or F. And it'll be true of some people in this room who have found out that perhaps their uterus doesn't look the way that it's supposed to, or they don't produce the correct balance of hormones that we would have expected. And you see the use of the word correct, there's a judgment in it. As many, if we take the loosest definition here, as many as 1 in 50 people will have one or more characteristic that doesn't conform with the others, whether it's a too high testosterone level in a woman, whether it's a congenital insensitivity of cellular receptors to the effects of testosterone, whether it's a chromosomal deviation or variant, whether it's some form of intersex that manifests with mixed gonadal tissue. This will happen a lot more frequently than we understand. 1 in 50. Some people will never become aware of this fact. Some people will realize it at puberty when their bodies change in ways that are unexpected. Some people will realize it when they try to conceive a pregnancy and they are unable to do so. Some people we will find out coincidentally if we do an autopsy for them after they pass away for other reasons. We might find out that they are intersex in some way, shape, or form. When I say 1 in 50, it should illustrate for you that this is not some form of illness or disease, because illnesses and diseases in society do not have a prevalence of 1 in 50. When we speak about 1 in 50 people, when we speak about that many, 2% of the population, we're talking about normal human variance. And this leads me to the conclusion that the binary of male and female is flawed. The true concept of biological sex does not neatly conform in all cases to male or female. And when I say a binary, I'm talking about a system where there are two factors or two components, and any individual must be one or the other. You certainly cannot be neither. You certainly cannot be both. You cannot have mixed features. That is a binary system. And this binary of male and female is flawed. And we see this not just in human beings. We see it throughout the animal kingdom, where we see all kinds of weird things. Never mind X and Y chromosomes, we start dealing with W's and Z's. And we have fish that will differentiate towards masculine or feminine features depending on the needs of the community and the society that they find themselves in at different points in their lives. Sex is not a binary concept. Sex is far more complicated and nuanced than this binary of male and female. And what we have done here is we have conflated the concept of common with the concept of normal. So certainly if I have 1 in 50 people, and it means that the remaining 49 out of 50 people do tick all of the boxes in the same column, what I don't have here is normal versus abnormal. Instead, what I have is common versus uncommon or less common. And you can see how the words that I'm using, and perhaps if I deliver the same sort of presentation a year or two from now, I will have different words in place of this. But I use these words because they don't carry the same baggage as the normal and the abnormal. They don't have the same value judgment. They tell us that we have mistaken what is common for what is normal. And make no mistake, if a child is born and we cannot determine whether those external genitalia are male or female, in many instances, still in 2021 in this world, that child will be operated on, have surgical intervention without their consent that will alter their body for the rest of their lives, that might influence even their fertility or their capacity to reproduce for the rest of their lives in an irreversible nature without their consent. This is what we do still to intersex children, and there are parts of the world where we have banned this, we have criminalized operating on intersex children. You can only operate on someone once they are old enough to understand what the surgery entails and whether they can decide for themselves if it's something that they want. So remember the concept of agency. We still do this in parts of the world. In fact, even in South Africa, we do not as yet have legislation to outlaw surgical intervention on intersex children. So what I'm telling you here is that this concept that we have does damage to people in very real and in very tangible ways. So this is sex in a nutshell, and I hope that it's given you a broader understanding of just how nuanced that concept is, that even when we look at ourselves, in a lot of situations, we are making assumptions about our sex. However, having said that, if any of us in this room were to put up our hands and say that we know ourselves to be female, do you think that it would be appropriate for us to say, all right, well, you need to prove it by testing the chromosomes and the gonadal tissue and the hormone levels? Certainly not. Certainly not. We understand that people have a right to their own identity. Now, when I speak about gender, and I've said to you this concept of social construct, which to me is a little bit of a buzzword or a catchphrase that we throw around without necessarily understanding it. So I had to conceptualize a better way for myself to understand gender, and this is what I'm going to teach you today. Gender, I divide up into gender identity, gender expression, and then, of course, the concept that I think we're all familiar with, gender roles or gender norms. Now, again, and I will ask just for a show of hands, and since this is an international women's society, who of us consider ourselves or label ourselves or know ourselves to be women? You can put up your hand. If you're a woman, you can put up your hand. Now you know this to be true about yourself. Whether you've had your hormones tested, your chromosomes analyzed, your gonadal tissue biopsied or not, you know yourself to be a woman. Let me ask for a volunteer. If you are a woman and you know yourself to be one, what is it that makes you a woman? How do you know? How do you know that that is who and what you are?
Volunteers, anyone? I see Elizabeth. You can unmute yourself if you'd like to say something.
Yeah, I'm actually Pam, but I'm sitting with Elizabeth. I definitely know I'm a woman because I like men very much, and all my feelings are feminine. I like clothes, I like this, I like women things. I have no attraction to another woman at all, other than being a friend. So I know absolutely I am a woman. The way I feel, everything, the way of life. So I would never doubt for one moment that I wasn't a woman. Does that make sense? Does that make sense?
Thank you, Pam. And since you volunteered, I'm going to keep you on the line for just a second. Pam, let's say that instead of the pretty dress or the blouse or whatever it is, if we were to put you in a man's tuxedo, would you be less of a woman?
If you put me in sorry, our sound is not so good. If you put me in a tuxedo, no, it wouldn't make any difference.
It wouldn't make any difference.
No, I like the tuxedo maybe, but no. I can see the attraction of being a man. Now we are more powerful. That's okay, and we are more equal as women. But
yeah, it's slowly becoming legal to be a woman in society these days, and I think that's great. All right.
No, doing all that business. No, I mean, no, it wouldn't change me at all. you know, I have a friend who was, when I was a child, was born with both. They didn't know who he was, like you just explained. And I remember the announcement coming out that the friends had had a girl, and then 6 weeks later they changed it to they'd had a boy. So I presume in 1944 he was operated on, and he remained a man. He's a man. But like the decisions, I never knew that they did that in you know, I never heard until you just mentioned that they would operate in those days, perhaps, to make sure that you were whatever your parents wanted, perhaps. Anyway, that's
Correct.
enough me talking.
Correct. All right. So I'll come back to some of the points that you raised, but maybe I can ask for another volunteer to tell me what it is that makes you understand that you are a woman.
I'll go because I'm quite non-girly, although some people might not agree. I hate shopping. I hate having to get dressed up and stuff. I'm not particularly comfortable in the company of women, which why I'm part of this club you probably would question. But I would quite happily, if I could be a man, but I'm attracted to men, and I really enjoy the company of men. So yes, there's maybe a slightly different slant.
All right.
But I'm definitely a woman, and I'm definitely cis, I would say.
All right. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. What I'm gonna ask next is, I wonder, do we have anyone who will, and I don't mean to put anyone on the spot here. So perhaps, you know what, perhaps let's actually just keep this to a theoretical discussion. So what I'm going to ask you next is, if we have a woman who is attracted to other women, a lesbian, is she less of a woman? What do you think? No. Does she necessarily want to be a man? I should think not. All right. So we know that commonly we understand that women are attracted to men, but not all women are, and it's not a defining characteristic. We know that women often might choose to dress in ways that are more expressive of femininity, but we also know that if they choose not to, it doesn't make them any less of a woman. We know that some women might love to shop, some might not. It doesn't make them any less of a woman. We know that some women are capable of and will reproduce or bear children. We also know that there are many women who do not want to or are not physically capable of conceiving children, and they are certainly not any less of women. We know that women have physical characteristics like breasts, but if a woman were to have her breasts removed, which can happen for a number of different reasons, medically speaking, she's not less of a woman after having that mastectomy. Knowing that you are a woman is a matter of your identity. It is hardwired. You cannot change it, and no one can change it for you. If I were to inject any one of you with large amounts of testosterone, I might be able to give you body hair and acne and make you smell bad, and you might feel miserable, but I will never convince you that you are not a woman. That reality of your identity sits in between your ears. It belongs to you. Identity, and this is a quote that was given to me by a participant in one of the workshops that I did for the South African Judicial Education Institute. Identity belongs to the bearer. I cannot see your gender identity when I look at you. We all have gender identity, whether we are cisgender, transgender, straight, gay, lesbian, whatever. We all have gender identity. We know that we are women, or we know that we are men, or we know that those labels do not fit for us. And no one can convince us otherwise. Everything that we've spoken about, the mannerisms, the habits, the attraction that people experience, the gender to which they are attracted, these are all the gender norms, the expectations that we have. And this is, you can think of countless different ideas or examples of gender norms. It's very easy to do so. Girls do stay at home, raise the children, do the cooking. They don't go into scientific fields. They are more emotional than men. They don't climb trees. They don't play rough contact sports. They dress in garments that are pink and frilly. Let me ask you this. In 2021, where arguably most of the clothes that you see in the store are fashioned out of polyester, does polyester have a gender? Is it male or female? It's a synthetic fabric. It has no gender. But depending on the color that we dye it, the shape into which we cut it, which side of the garment we affix the buttons, it becomes masculine or feminine. These are the expectations and the norms that society applies to people. And then the expression that we have, this is what we communicate to the world. When I put on a set of pink scrubs, or when you put on the pretty dress, or when you wear makeup, these are expressions of gender through mechanisms that are inherently ungendered. As we've spoken about, the clothes do not have a gender, but this is what we communicate to the world. And through this lens of the norms, we will look at someone's gender expression and we will determine if the two are congruent. We will determine if the two are congruent. Please note that when I look at someone, I can see their expression and I can make a judgment about the norms, but I do not know their identity. If we take Pam, who identifies as a woman, and we give her a masculine haircut and we put her in the tuxedo, I do not know if Pam identifies as a man or as a woman. All I can comment on is the expression that I see in front of me and whether it's in line with the norms and the expectations. And when there is a disconnect here, and I'm going to wrap up after this so we can have a moment for questions. When there is a disconnect between the expression and the norms, that's when we start to perpetrate violence against people. This is when we tell people, no, you cannot sit like that. No, you cannot dress like that. No, you shouldn't be attracted to other women. This is when we start to take steps in order to fix people, what we see as deviant or broken or abnormal. Again, coming back to that judgment that we make. This is the root of the prejudice and the discrimination and the violence that it leads to. And none of it has anything to do with who you are. We don't know who you are unless you tell us. Your identity belongs to you. But based on what you communicate to us, your expression, based on the judgments that we make about your gender, about your age, about your skin color, about your background, we determine what you are worth in society. So, with that, I hope that I've managed to illustrate some of the concepts around sexual orientation, gender identity, expression, the differences between sex and gender, the nuances and the complexity of biological and physiological sex. And not just that, but the role of language and the role of agency in determining identity and how it shapes the way that we move through the world. I have much more to talk about, but I know that we are running short on time. Do we perhaps have time to open to the audience for a question or two?
We do have something from Giovanna Sartor saying, thank you so much for a most informative talk. Thank you, Giovanna.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for the feedback.
Okay, Pam has another question.
Oh, sorry.
What about Casta Semenya? Should she be penalized for having too much testosterone? I mean, she goes through so much. Should she be competing against women or men? Or do you have no opinion on that?
I have a lot of opinions on it. Pam, I'm gonna ask you to mute because I'm getting a little bit of feedback from your microphone. I have a lot of opinions on it. Probably my strongest opinion is that if Caster Semenya was a young white American woman, we would not be subjecting her to the kind of violence that we are subjecting her. I think that all kinds of different power dynamics and intersectional discrimination is very much active in the case of Caster Semenya. The fact that she comes from the global south, that she is a person of color, that she identifies herself as a queer woman, as a lesbian woman, all of these things factor against her, and she's seen as a threat, and people are trying to police her physiology and her body. We don't routinely test every athlete for testosterone levels. In fact, we've yet to confirm scientifically that there is an advantage conferred by differing testosterone levels in any conclusive manner. And I think that when we start policing people's identities and we try to force them to take dangerous medications that have horrible, horrible long-term side effects in order for them to compete, that this is problematic. I also think it's very interesting that the whole definition of competitive sports is an entity or an enterprise that is set up to select for and to identify those who have an unnatural genetic or congenital advantage over other people. If you're telling me that it's fair for Michael Phelps to compete against any other swimmer in the world, of course it's not fair. He's got arms that are 2 meters long. He's built like a dolphin. It is an unfair advantage, but because it's Michael Phelps, because he's a white man, we celebrate those advantages. We don't seek to strip him of his natural advantage and say that it's unfair for him to compete. So there are a lot of double standards at work. It will take me several hours to unpack the Caster Semenya debate, but the points that I want to get across is that I think this is misogyny. I think this is racism at play.
Any other questions? Mohini, go for it.
Yeah. Hi, I found the talk today so informative and so interesting. A lot of ladies, I think, in our age group were brought up in the 60s, 70s, where we didn't speak about a lot of things and it was taboo. And, you know, we grew up with very little knowledge, and I have to say that the children of today and the youngsters actually teach us a lot. And I'm forever, you know, learning from my daughter who taught me recently about asking somebody in an interview what pronoun they prefer to be, you know, called by. And it was so new to me. And so I find it very informative. And I think it's important for all of us to know these things and to learn and to, you know, to learn from them.
Thank you for that. One of the things that I do often say is that when we fail to talk about issues like the LGBT community, when we fail to have these discussions with our children, when we fail to include this in comprehensive sexuality education, we are not remaining passive. We are putting out a statement, we're taking a position, which is to say there's something wrong with this, it's taboo, we cannot talk about it. And that's not okay, because it leads to the queer kids in those classrooms understanding that there's something shameful about who they are. And no child should have to grow up feeling shame for who they are. That is violent and that is unforgivable.
This is probably a frivolous question, but could you just tell us what the difference is between the rainbow flag and the transgender flag?
Oh, yeah, sure. I can do that. I happen to have both of them on my desk. So this is the gay flag, gay pride flag. As you can see here, the rainbow flag. There are some places now where they're incorporating additional stripes at the bottom, a brown stripe and a black stripe, to try and make it more inclusive. This one is the trans pride flag that I'm holding up here. There are so many different, I can even show you the asexual pride flag if you like. That would be this one. So every little subsection of the community seems to have developed its own flag, and the colors all represent different things. And we continue to have a lot of discussions around whether the flags are inclusive enough, and they are very much a work in progress. But I hope that illustrates the concept for you.
Is that just internal politics? I should improve. Internal's probably the wrong word, but yeah, within the community.
Yeah, let's say that it is. You know, it's interesting, and again, not the space for a history lesson. The civil rights movement, which is actually, so people think that Pride is a parade and a party. Pride is a political uprising, and Pride has its origins in New York City in 1969, and the riots there were actually the protests that define Pride were driven by transgender women of color. And for a long time, the civil rights movement that tried to really get equality for gay people was co-opted by white upper middle class, predominantly cisgender gay men. So, you know, there are dynamics in all of these processes where one group has forwarded its own interests at the expense of another. And for many of us, especially those who identify themselves as queer, we're always trying to find ways where we can further dismantle these structural and institutional inequalities, and certainly not perpetuate them. You know, I don't want to cause harm to anyone else. That's why I have to think very carefully when I give such a presentation about the words and about the language that I use, because I recognize I am representing the community, and there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that.
Just on what you've just said about community, maybe 10 years ago, if you said the gay community, you would get the feedback, oh, where do they live? Where was that geographically located? But so it was kind of something that you shouldn't use. But now I hear it used far more, you know, potentially more in the political or rather than political, I should say activism side.
Yeah, so again, it really just comes down to who is using the word and for what purpose. And I think that's where we normalize language. So, you know, don't get me wrong, when I say to you that the word queer has been reclaimed, it's not a license for straight people to walk around applying the label queer to everyone. It's a word that we use for ourselves. You know, I say I'm part of the queer community because that's empowering for me, because I get to choose it. One still has to be very hesitant when applying that word to others. And there are people who are part of the LGBTQIA+ community who are lesbian or gay or whatever else, who do not like the word queer. So I won't use that word in reference to someone unless I know that it's a word that they choose for themselves.
Anastasia, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, it's Molly. Anastasia, just a thought, babies being assigned to their sex, gender when they're born, male or female, should there be a chromosome test at that stage?
No, absolutely not. That wasn't the intention of what I said. So we don't know anyone's biological sex to the full capacity. We shouldn't go out and try and start testing people and finding out what it is. Actually, it's a call to say that when children are born, we should endeavor to provide an environment for them that is, at least to some or other degree, liberated from this restrictive binary notion of what bodies are and how they should look, and again, of what identity should look like. And we are far off from that becoming a reality. But I think, you know, we're all smart enough adults to be able to understand that, you know, if someone who was assigned male at birth, or a child who identifies as a boy wants to wear nail polish, there shouldn't be any harm in that. You know, if a girl wants to climb trees and wear boyish clothes, there shouldn't be any harm in that. So it's really the expectations and the baggage that we put on all of this that we need to dismantle. So it's not about trying to use science in order to reinforce these ideas. It's really about recognizing that the science is much more complex, and trying to force everyone into these boxes is hugely problematic, and it leaves a vast swaths of the population out in the cold. And we're not doing anyone any favors once we start performing invasive and not to mention costly, but invasive testing on them.
Just one other, just to follow up on that. Should somebody who decides later as yourself that you are not what you were assigned as a child, shouldn't you be able to live your life then as a female, but without having to have all the medical changes? If it's your identity in your mind, is it imperative that you actually have to go about it in a medical fashion?
No, so this is something that I do often speak about in other talks and presentations that I give, is that whatever interventions a person wants, whether they're medical, surgical, whether it's changing legal documents or names, or whether it's the right to dress in a certain way or whatever else, this should be up to the individual. It looks different for everyone. A lot of trans people want to go on hormones, and they are much happier and much healthier when they are on hormone therapy. It should never be a prerequisite. It should never be forced on anyone. You know, similarly, some institutions, even in South Africa, have tried to leverage trans people in that they will refuse them access to hormone therapy unless they give a commitment that at some point down the line they want to have surgery. And these are frank abuses of human rights. It should be up to the individual. It should be about your agency. This is your body. And the role of the medical practitioner is one to facilitate safely and supportively.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Maria, you had a question? Go ahead, Maria. Just unmute yourself, please.
I have a question. Is the world intellectually in place to actually accept all these things as, I know you don't like the word normal, but as to introduce all this into a normal society? I know you're an activist, and so I understand your problems, but I really feel for you, because intellectually, I don't think that they have the world is ready for any of this. It's been going on since ancient history.
Yeah, so the world certainly isn't ready in a lot of ways. It's interesting that you say it's been going on since ancient history, because if you delve back into the history of any civilization on any continent, you will find expressions of diversity in gender identity and in sexual orientation. And in the majority of those cultures, these differences were celebrated instead of persecuted. So if you were a transgender person living in a First Nations community in America, you were probably venerated as a person of healing or as someone with shamanistic qualities. The same is true in ancient African cultures, ancient South American cultures, Asian cultures, even in the representations that we have of deities and god figures in various religions. There are often manifestations of multiple expressions of sexuality or gender or biological sex at once. And somewhere along the line, this developed into something that we persecute and that we victimize. So I would dispute the idea that the world isn't ready, because this has been going on for centuries. I think the further you go back, the less entrenched these ideas would be. Certainly the world we live in today is not intellectually ready, but that's why we have to have these conversations. This is why we have to spread that understanding a little bit wider, because the times are changing. and the narrative is shifting, and you can see it. You can see it in the language that we use. It's proof. You know, when they and them becomes the Merriam-Webster word of the year, gender neutral pronoun, it tells you things are changing. So, you know, it is one thing to acknowledge that the world isn't there yet, but we also shouldn't use that as an excuse to not have the conversation.
Do we have any other questions? I think we should probably think about wrapping up soon.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to bid you farewell in the next 2 or 3 minutes.
Perfect. I think it seems that we've answered everybody's questions. And I would like to thank you very much, Anastasia, for being our speaker and for sharing all of this important educational information so that we know that we can treat those around us in a non-judgmental and in a loving and in a thoughtful and caring way, even if maybe some of our members have not historically been exposed or understood all of these things, but now we can go ahead in a way that is better for the world. So.
Fantastic. That's all that I came here to achieve. It's a little bit of understanding and some compassion. And thank you for your participation. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for your attendance today. I think this is incredibly important. I do a lot of work as an activist, but I want to say to everyone who sat here and listened and participated and thought about what we spoke about today, you are doing some activism for this community, and I appreciate that.
Great. All right. Thank you to everyone who attended. Again, thank you to our speaker, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day and rest of your week. Take care. I'm going to end the meeting now.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.